Welcome to Night Whispers for Sleep, where dark, unsettling stories help you slowly doze off. If you enjoy these stories, please like and subscribe. Most nights along Long Island Sound in the 1930s passed without ever asking to be remembered. The water lay dark and flat, breathing in slow, steady pulls that matched the rhythm of sleeping towns. Houses built for summer laughter stood closed and silent, their windows black, their porches empty, their doors locked against a season no one loved. Fishing boats rested against their moorings like tired animals, ropes creaking softly as the tide shifted beneath them. Wooden docks stretched into the Sound, slick with salt, smelling of old nets, tar, and cold iron. The world after sunset felt smaller here, quieter, as if sound itself had learned to walk softly. Wind slipped through marsh grass in long, whispering strokes, bending the reeds and letting them rise again. Somewhere far out on the water, a foghorn called, low and hollow, its voice flattening the distance between shore and horizon. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened quickly, and where nothing happening felt like a promise. Men who worked the docks at night learned every sound by heart. They knew the knock of loose boards, the clatter of halyards, the slap of water against hulls. They knew when a sound belonged and when it didn't. Night watchmen paced the same routes every evening, boots tracing grooves into the planks, lantern light rocking gently with each step. Lighthouse keepers stood alone with their beams, counting seconds between flashes, watching darkness fold back and return again. These were not men given to nerves or imagination. They trusted repetition more than stories. So when the footprints first appeared, they were treated like a curiosity. They showed up just after dawn when the fog lifted and the shoreline came back into focus. One set of footprints pressed cleanly into the sand. Bare feet. No shoes. No socks. Each toe clearly formed, each heel sunk deep as if the walker had carried weight. The stride was even, unhurried, deliberate. Dock workers noticed them while unloading crates and coiling rope, stopping only long enough to squint and chuckle. Someone joked about a drunk wandering home from the wrong party. Someone else blamed a sleepwalker. A few said it must be a fisherman cutting across the beach before sunrise. No one bothered to follow the prints very far at first. They seemed harmless, almost thoughtful. The footprints ran parallel to the water, never angling toward town, never turning inland. They stayed close to the Sound as if keeping company with it. By mid-morning, the tide usually erased them. Sand smoothed itself back into blankness. The beach forgot. The next morning they returned. Again just one set. Again barefoot. Again evenly spaced. They appeared along different stretches of shoreline miles apart, but always the same. Same depth. Same size. Same pace. Lighthouse keepers mentioned them casually in logbooks, a passing remark between weather notes and fuel checks. Night watchmen began to expect them, glancing down at the sand as part of their routine. Children heard about them and dared each other to walk barefoot at dawn to compare prints. Local papers never bothered to mention it. There was no urgency to it, no threat anyone could name, just footprints. But some men noticed small things they didn't mention out loud. The impressions were deeper than they should have been. Deeper than a man of average build would leave. Deeper even when the sand was packed hard and cold. And stranger still, the prints never overlapped with anyone else's. They didn't cross wagon tracks. They didn't intersect with dog prints or gull marks. They moved through the beach as if nothing else had walked there before. Each morning, the Sound lay calm, indifferent, stretching endlessly gray beneath the rising light. And each morning, the footprints waited. Always leading forward, never turning back, never doubling over themselves, and always stopping suddenly, not at rocks, not at water, not at any clear boundary, just ending, as if the person who made them had simply decided not to take another step. At first, this detail passed unnoticed. It took repetition to sharpen attention. Week after week, the same thing happened. Different beaches, same footprints, same ending. Men began to follow them farther, walking slowly, hands in pockets, eyes down. They expected to find another set eventually, heading away, looping back, or vanishing into surf. But there was nothing. Only smooth sand beyond the last impression. No drag marks. No scuffing. No sign of struggle or misstep. The footprints didn't fade or scatter. They stopped with intention. Some laughed it off harder than, uncomfortable with how precise it felt. Stories were told louder in dockside bars. Folklore crept in gently, the way it always did. Old tales of coastal spirits. Drowned sailors who walked the shore before storms. Warnings passed down without anyone remembering who first said them. Most people still believed there had to be a simple explanation. There always was. Until one morning, a dock worker named Harris stood staring at the sand longer than usual. The tide had come in high during the night. Higher than it had in days. The waterline had climbed the beach and pulled back again, leaving damp sand and a scatter of shells. And there, just beyond where the water had reached, above the high tide line, untouched by waves, untouched by foam, was the same single line of bare footprints. The footprints did not belong to one town for very long. They appeared in places that did not speak to one another, along stretches of the Sound separated by miles of water and silence. A dock worker in Port Jefferson mentioned them to a cousin in Bay Shore, only to learn they had already been seen there too. A night watchman in New Rochelle heard the same story repeated back to him by a fisherman who worked farther east. Always the same detail. Bare feet. One set. Unhurried. The Sound carried the story quietly as it carried everything. Soon the footprints were no longer limited to beaches. They began appearing on docks. Long wooden docks that stretched into dark water, boards swollen with age and damp from mist. Footprints pressed into the thin layer of salt and sand that settled there overnight. Each print perfectly formed, toes visible, arches curved, heels firm. They ran straight down the planks, never staggering, never drifting toward the edge. Dock workers paused in their routines longer now, crouching to touch the marks, brushing fingers along the grooves. The wood had not splintered. The boards had not cracked. But the impressions were unmistakable. As if the dock itself had briefly softened to receive them. Sea walls came next. Cold stone barriers meant to hold the Sound back from land. Footprints appeared along their tops, aligned neatly as though the walker trusted the narrow edge without hesitation. There were no scuffs, no slips, no sign of imbalance. Just bare feet walking calmly above the water. Men began to stop laughing when they spoke about it. Jokes grew shorter. Folklore thinned. People listened more carefully. Winter arrived, and with it came the belief that the footprints would finally stop. Beaches froze hard, sand locking together under a skin of ice. The Sound grew steel gray, slow and heavy. Snow fell and stayed. For a few nights, there were no new reports. And then one morning, a lighthouse keeper found them again. Bare feet. Pressed into snow. Not shallow. Not scattered. Deep. Each step sunk cleanly through the crust, compressing the powder beneath. The stride was unchanged. The spacing identical to summer mornings. No drag marks. No sliding. As if the walker felt no cold at all. Frozen beaches across the Sound showed the same thing. Footprints moving steadily along shorelines hardened by winter. Never breaking stride. Never hesitating. Men stood silently beside them, breath fogging the air, unable to explain how flesh could leave marks like that in such cold. Witnesses began comparing details more carefully. They counted steps, measured distance, noted angles, same stride length, same spacing, same depth whether sand, wood, stone, or snow. The surface did not matter. The walker did not adjust. That was when the word pattern began to surface. Not spoken loudly, but understood. The footprints also stopped the same way every time. Abruptly, at the water's edge, or in open sand, or halfway across a dock. Sometimes on wooden planks that extended out over nothing but dark water below. One moment there were steps. Then there were not. No return trail. No sign of turning, just absence. Winter deepened. Snow fell heavier. Storms rolled in from the sound and pressed against the shore. On certain nights, snowfall came fast and thick, erasing tracks within minutes. And yet, by morning the footprints were there, pressed through untouched snow, as though they had appeared after the storm, or during it. This detail settled uneasily into people's thoughts, because it meant timing no longer mattered. Darkness no longer mattered. Weather no longer mattered. Locals began staying awake. At first, only out of curiosity. Men sat on docks with coats pulled tight, lanterns turned low, listening to the water lap beneath them. Lighthouse keepers lingered longer between rounds, leaning into the cold, ears open. Night watchmen slowed their patrols, pausing at corners where sound carried. The sound filled the darkness with familiar noise. Waves, wind, wood shifting, rope knocking softly against posts. And then, slowly, something else. Footsteps. Not loud, not hurried, just steady, measured. The sound of bare feet meeting surface. One step, then another. Even pace. No breath. No voice. No cough or clearing of the throat. Just the rhythm of walking. Some men froze where they stood. Others turned too quickly, lantern light swinging across empty space. The footsteps continued, sometimes passing directly behind them, sometimes moving along the dock just out of sight. Always calm, always unbothered. One night, a watchman stood at the end of a pier, staring into black water, listening as footsteps approached. They came closer, board by board, step by step, until he was certain the walker stood only a few feet away. He turned. There was no one there. The footsteps stopped, and the dock was empty. By the time spring returned to the sound, curiosity had thinned into something sharper. People no longer stumbled onto the footprints by accident. They went looking for them. Small towns along the shoreline began organizing informal watches. Nothing official, nothing written down. Just men agreeing to stay awake a little longer than usual. Dock workers volunteered to take extra shifts. Night watchmen slowed their rounds deliberately. Fishermen lingered on shore instead of heading home before dawn. They brought lanterns, thermoses, thick coats, and patience. Some chose the docks, believing the narrow planks would force the walker into view. Others waited on open beaches, sitting on overturned crates or rocks, staring into darkness until their eyes ached. Hours passed. Waves moved in and out. The sound breathed. Nothing happened. Then, without warning, footsteps. Slow. Even. Approaching. Men straightened, hearts lifting into their throats as the sound grew closer. They held lanterns steady, light cutting shallow paths across wood and sand. The footsteps continued. Closer. Closer still. Passing directly behind them. Close enough to feel. Close enough to swear the air shifted. And yet, when they turned, there was no one there. Lantern light revealed only empty dock. Empty beach. Empty air. Some men laughed too loudly, then, nerves stretching thin. Others said nothing at all. They stayed through the night anyway. Waiting. Watching. In several towns, footprints were discovered while people were actively watching the shoreline. Men stood in pairs, eyes fixed on the sand, speaking only in whispers. They swore the ground had been empty moments before. And then it wasn't. Bare footprints pressed into the surface where no one had stepped. Fresh. Clear. Undeniable. One account spread faster than the rest, passed from dock to dock in low voices. 2 watchmen had stood side by side on a beach just before dawn. They left their own footprints behind them as they paced. One line, then another. Between those 2 lines, perfectly centered. A third set appeared. Bare feet. Same stride. Same depth. Neither man had seen it happen. Neither could explain how it had happened without being seen. That story changed the way people talked. Rational explanations were brought out and handled carefully, like tools laid on a table. Tides were blamed first. Unusual wave patterns. Water pulling sand in strange ways. But tides did not leave toes. They did not choose even spacing. They did not stop abruptly in the middle of docks. Pranksters were suggested next. Teenagers. Outsiders. Men with time and a cruel sense of humor. But pranksters wore shoes in winter. They left messy trails. They tired. Animals were considered. Raccoons. Seals. Odd migratory patterns. But animals did not walk in straight lines. They did not place each step with such care. They did not leave the exact same impressions year after year. None of it held together for long. Because none of it explained bare human feet. None of it explained prints on frozen docks. None of it explained the way the walker never slipped, never stumbled, never hesitated. Fear did not arrive suddenly. It crept. Night patrols grew shorter. Fewer volunteers showed up. Lanterns stayed unlit more often. Men began turning back early, telling themselves there was no point. No one said the word afraid. But fewer people stood alone at night now. And then the footprints changed their direction. For the first time they angled away from the sound. They crossed beaches and did not turn back. They moved inland, toward houses that were still asleep. The first yard footprints were discovered just after sunrise. A narrow strip of grass pressed flat in a straight line, dew broken where bare feet had passed. They did not wander. They did not circle. They moved with the same calm certainty the shoreline prints always had. People stood on porches longer that morning, robes pulled tight, eyes tracing paths that should not have existed. The footprints crossed lawns without hesitation, passing garden beds, fences, and clotheslines. They did not stop to explore. They did not linger. They simply moved through. Porches came next. Wooden steps worn smooth by years of use bore shallow impressions as if the grain itself had yielded. Bare footprints appeared where only shoes were ever expected. At the top of steps. Along porch boards. Sometimes stopping directly in front of doors. Not touching them. Not turning away. Just stopping. As if listening. Dirt roads near the coast began showing the same marks. Thin paths winding between houses and shoreline, rutted by wagons and softened by rain. Footprints appeared in these roads overnight, cutting clean lines through mud and dust. They did not veer toward trees. They did not stray into fields. They followed the roads exactly as though they knew where they were going. People stopped letting children play barefoot near dusk. Doors were locked earlier. Windows stayed closed even on warm nights. Some families began checking their yards before stepping outside each morning. The footprints brought the sound closer than it had ever been before. Inside the boundary people believed they had built. In several towns, prints stopped directly at doorsteps. Toes aligned neatly with thresholds. Heels just short of crossing inside. No sign of entry. No sign of retreat. Only presence. Below bedroom windows, footprints appeared in soft soil and damp grass. Close enough for someone inside to hear breathing if there had been any. Close enough to imagine a face turned upward in the dark. But no one ever reported seeing a face. Only the sound. Footsteps were heard on wooden stairs in the middle of the night. Slow. Even. Measured. Each step distinct, weight transferring cleanly from heel to toe. People lay awake, hearts pounding, counting steps as they approached and then stopped. No door opened. No floorboard creaked beyond what was expected. On docks directly beneath bedrooms, footsteps passed in the early hours. Planks answered with soft, hollow knocks. The sound carried upward through walls and into sleep-thin dreams. Some thought they were imagining it, until footprints appeared the next morning below the windows. The war years pressed themselves into every sound and shadow. Blackouts turned towns into silhouettes. Streetlights stayed dark. Windows were covered. The sound itself became something to watch carefully. Coastal patrols moved along shorelines at night, boots heavy, eyes scanning water and land alike. Fear of saboteurs settled into conversations like grit. Any unexplained movement carried weight now. Authorities were notified. Investigations were conducted quietly. Flashlights swept beaches, docks, yards, and roads. Measurements were taken. Statements recorded. Nothing conclusive was ever found. No tracks leading to boats. No signs of forced entry. No human explanation that held together long enough to be believed. The footprints continued, unaffected by patrol schedules, unaffected by blackout rules, unaffected by fear. Some families packed their belongings and left the coast entirely. They moved inland where the sound could not be heard at night, where waves could not reach them, where footsteps belonged to neighbors and animals and nothing else. Houses left behind stood empty, windows dark, yards slowly returning to weeds. Still, the footprints came. They passed through abandoned yards as easily as occupied ones. They approached empty porches with the same calm intention. And always they turned back. Each trail ended where it began, at the edge of the sound. The reports did not end with a final footprint. There was no last morning where someone pointed and said this was the end. Instead, the sound grew quiet the way old habits do. Gradually, without ceremony. In the late 1940s, mornings arrived without interruption. Beaches smoothed themselves clean overnight and stayed that way. Dock workers stepped onto planks expecting to see something waiting for them, and saw only wood, only salt stains, only ordinary signs of use. At first, this absence felt temporary. People assumed the walker would return, that it was only resting, or delayed. Weeks passed, then months, and no one quite knew when they stopped expecting it. The footprints had lasted long enough to feel permanent. Their disappearance felt wrong in a quieter way, as if something dependable had been removed. Records from the period grow thinner and less specific. Logbooks mention weather, tides, routine maintenance. The shoreline returned to ink and paper the way it had always been before. There was no explanation written because none had ever been found. No authority ever claimed certainty. No scientist offered proof. No official report closed the matter cleanly. It simply drifted into memory. People who had watched the beaches at night grew older. Some moved inland. Some passed away. Some stopped speaking about it entirely. Those who did speak softened their language. They used words like maybe, probably, long ago. Stories filled the space where facts had failed. A drowned sailor became the most common version. A man lost during a storm, wandering the shore because he could not find his way back to sea. People said he walked barefoot because the water had taken everything else. That he stopped at dawn because the sound called him home again. Others preferred older explanations. A colonial ghost. Someone tied to land grants and old boundaries. A presence older than modern towns. Walking lines drawn long before maps were settled. The war gave rise to its own legends. Blackout nights. Unseen patrols. A figure moving deliberately along the shore while the world slept. None of these stories ever matched every detail. None explained the snow, or the docks, or the years. They were not meant to. They were meant to settle people, to give shape to unease. As time passed, children heard the story as something half serious. Something adults mentioned when the sound was loud at night. Teenagers dared each other to walk the beaches at dawn. Most found nothing, and most believed that was the point. The sound erased footprints every day. It always had. Tides pulled sand flat. Waves rearranged shorelines without memory. Nothing lasted long enough to matter. Except once it had. Decades later, similar reports surfaced in quiet ways. A single set of footprints discovered after a storm. Bare feet. Even spacing. Ending without explanation. A dock worker might mention it once and never again. A photograph might exist briefly before being misplaced. These moments never gathered weight. They never lasted long enough to become patterns. But they unsettled those who remembered the old stories, because they knew how it had started before, and how long it had taken to stop. Today the shoreline looks ordinary. Summer homes stand open again. Docks creak under familiar footsteps. The sound reflects sunrise the way it always has. Nothing appears out of place. Nothing announces itself. And yet the beaches remain wide, open, patient. At dawn, fog lifts slowly from the water. Sand cool beneath the air. Gulls settle and cry. The tide draws a clean line and retreats. Most mornings there is nothing there. But once, there was one line of footprints. Bare feet, pressed deep, ending just short of the water, as if the sound were still deciding whether to take them back. Something was missing in the backyard that afternoon. Margaret didn't know what it was, only that the air felt different, heavier, almost expectant. The sun dipped low over Hickory, painting the quiet streets in streaks of gold and soft rose. Children's laughter floated across the yards, bright and carefree, yet Margaret noticed a hollow edge to it, as if it belonged to someone else. She ran barefoot, toes curling into the warm grass, chasing a shadow she could not name. Daniel's voice called out from the swings, "Come back, Margaret." But she didn't answer. Her small hand clutched her doll tightly, feeling its weight against her palm, grounding her to something familiar. Little Tommy tripped over a tree root. He scrambled up quickly, giggling, brushing dirt from his knees, oblivious to the hush that had begun to settle. Susan twirled in her dress, hair catching the light, arms stretched wide, spinning slowly as though she could touch the clouds. The swing creaked gently back and forth even when no one sat on it. Margaret tilted her head, listening to the faint scrape of a branch against the window. The other children shouted her name, but their voices sounded distant, muffled, swallowed by the rustle of leaves. Something pulled at her, gentle and insistent, a whisper she could not understand. The edge of the yard loomed ahead, where sunlight mingled with shadow in slow, curling patterns. Her feet sank slightly into the damp grass, cool and soft under her toes. The doll in her hand seemed to pulse with warmth, comforting her, steadying her steps. The crickets had begun their evening chorus, tiny, steady, like a heartbeat in the distance. A soft breeze brushed her cheek, carrying the faint scent of honeysuckle and something she could not name. Margaret stepped closer to the trees, drawn forward, curiosity pulling her like a magnet. The sun dipped lower, and the yard stretched in ways that felt impossible, longer than she remembered, wider, unfamiliar. Shadows curled around the bases of trees, folding over themselves, moving almost like they were alive. She paused, glancing back at the swings, at the sandbox, at the yard she had known all her life. But everything seemed altered, stretched, strange, as if the world had shifted while she wasn't looking. Her heart beat slowly, calm and steady, almost hypnotic, as if the air itself had slowed time. A shadow flickered at the corner of her vision. She turned her head, just enough to see it vanish before her eyes. Yet she kept moving forward, drawn deeper into the shade, deeper into the hush that had settled. Branches overhead swayed slowly, casting intricate, twisting patterns on the ground. The crickets chirped louder, steady and rhythmic, underscoring the silence that had grown in the yard. Margaret felt a tingle in the air, a strange sensation brushing over her skin, but not frightening, only curious, almost inviting. She passed the swing set, metal frame glinting in the fading light, empty and still, yet somehow aware. The grass grew cooler under her feet, and the shadows thickened, curling around her ankles like soft fingers. A faint sigh of wind whispered through the trees, brushing the strands of her hair across her cheek. Her small steps led her past flower beds she had tended, past fences she had climbed 100 times, into a part of the yard that felt new and unknown. The other children's voices faded completely, leaving only the distant hum of insects and the gentle rustle of leaves. Margaret's pulse slowed further, her breathing deepened, the doll pressing warmth into her hand. She glanced back, but the yard she had left seemed farther away, smaller, swallowed by the growing dusk. Shadows stretched in impossible ways, folding over themselves, hiding corners that should not exist. The pull grew stronger, gentle but undeniable, urging her forward, deeper into the edges of the backyard she had never explored. The branches above swayed slowly, casting shadows that moved differently than the wind, twisting, curling, alive. A bird called somewhere high above, its song trembling, echoing oddly in the quiet as if carried from another place. Margaret stepped closer, her bare feet sinking into the soft, damp earth, each step measured, calm, deliberate. The doll in her hand pressed warmth into her palm, as if sensing the pull she could not resist. The yard behind her seemed smaller now, as if shrinking, folding away from her path. She tilted her head to follow a flicker of shadow, quick, fleeting, gone before she could point it out. Yet it called to her, whispering in a way she could not hear, drawing her further, deeper, toward the unknown. The air grew cooler, soft and heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and something faintly sweet, like memory or dreams. Her steps slowed, gentle and quiet, echoing softly against the hush of evening. The trees seemed to bend slightly, shadows shifting, curling, guiding her forward, always forward. The swing set stood empty, the sandbox still, the yard fading behind her like a memory she could not hold. Margaret did not notice the change, did not notice the world folding into itself, only the gentle pull that led her onward. The cricket's song rose and fell, steady, hypnotic, as if keeping time for something unseen. The doll pressed warmth into her hand again, steadying her as the shadows thickened, curling around her ankles, climbing her legs like smoke. Margaret stepped forward one last time, and then she was gone from sight. The yard sighed. A faint gasp rose somewhere, soft and startled, echoing in the empty space where she had stood. Only the wind moved, brushing through the leaves, carrying a faint whisper that sounded like laughter, like breathing, like a presence just beyond reach. Something had shifted in the yard, subtle and patient, curling into the corners, folding the edges of light and shadow into itself. The other children stopped calling her name. The silence settled, thick and heavy, yet gentle, pressing over the grass and fences, over flowers and swings, over the empty air that had once been full of play. And in that quiet, in that stillness, the first hint of something not right lingered, patient and soft, waiting. The backyard was quiet now, too quiet, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The other children stopped playing, standing frozen, looking around with wide eyes. Daniel called her name again, louder this time, but it felt empty, swallowed by the evening air. A rustle of leaves answered him, soft and deliberate, though Margaret was nowhere to be seen. Little Tommy's knees scraped the ground as he ran toward the edge of the yard, searching, calling her name. Susan twirled, then froze, her hands clenching the fabric of her dress as she strained to hear a familiar laugh. Jenny's voice trembled, high-pitched and uncertain. Where did she go? The adults emerged from the house, drawn by the voices and the sudden stillness. Her mother ran barefoot across the warm grass, hair flying behind her, eyes wide with panic. "Margaret!" she called, her voice sharp, desperate, cracking at the edges. The father followed, slower, measured, calling her name into the deepening dusk, his heart hammering. Neighbors appeared at their gates, drawn by the commotion, their faces pale in the soft glow of the setting sun. Questions were whispered, hushed tones spreading like a ripple across the quiet street. No one saw her leave? She was just here a moment ago. She couldn't have gone far. The children shook their heads, pointing in every direction at once, as though each path might lead to her. The search began, first in the yard, then moving outward, past fences, past gardens, past familiar paths. The wind moved through the trees, brushing against the grass, carrying a faint, impossible scent that no one could name. Every shadow seemed to stretch, longer and darker than the light allowed, bending corners of reality just slightly. The parents split up, scanning the fields beyond the yard, calling her name with rising urgency. The evening air grew cooler, brushing their cheeks, tugging at hair, rustling clothes and soft, unsettling whispers. The children followed at a distance, their bare feet crunching over twigs, leaves, stones, fragile sounds in the vast hush. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, sharp and lonely, echoing across the quiet neighborhood. Every tree seemed taller now, its bark darker, more solid, as though hiding secrets in the deepening dusk. Footsteps crunched behind bushes, then vanished, leaving nothing but silence. Daniel's voice cracked, "Margaret." The parents' voices joined in chorus, sharp, desperate, calling into the shadows, but no answer came. The neighbors formed a line, searching the streets, the empty yards, even the sheds and garages. The fading sunlight painted long, dark streaks across fences, walls, and tree trunks, bending familiar shapes into something uncanny. Crickets began their evening song, loud and steady, a heartbeat against the stillness. Branches scraped against windows and fences, soft at first, then louder, deliberate, like invisible hands moving through the air. Every sound felt sharper now, as though the world were concentrating all attention on the missing child. Margaret's mother paused, listening, feeling a shiver run up her spine. She thought she heard something, a soft step, a whisper, a breath in the air that didn't belong to anyone. The children clung to each other, eyes wide, standing at the edge of the yard, watching shadows twist in impossible ways. Tommy pointed toward the tree line, trembling. There. Over there. The parents rushed toward the spot, calling her name, their voices echoing against the low hills beyond the yard. The ground was soft, covered in fallen leaves, nothing to show where she had gone, nothing to explain her absence. The wind picked up, gentle at first, then insistent, brushing over their faces, carrying a faint scent of earth and something older, something hidden. They searched the garden, the flower beds, the corners of the yard where shadows pooled thick and dark. Nothing moved except the branches above, swaying slowly, almost deliberately, in the growing gloom. Footsteps were heard, soft and quick, but when they looked, no one was there. The children's whispers grew urgent, low, full of fear they could not name. "Maybe she's in the woods," said Daniel, voice shaking. "Or behind the shed," said Jenny, pointing toward a small, dark corner of the yard. They moved, following leads that disappeared as quickly as they appeared, chasing echoes, shadows, and faint impressions of movement. The adults began calling louder, the words stretching across the evening, fading into the hush of trees and open fields. Every so often, a bird would call from high above, a trembling note that sounded far too human, far too knowing. The shadows thickened at the edges of vision, curling, folding, bending reality slightly with each passing moment. The parents paused, looking at one another, fear silent in their eyes, unspoken and heavy. A chill ran down Margaret's mother's spine, a whisper brushing her ear that no one else could hear. Daniel's voice trembled again. She couldn't just vanish like this. But no one had an answer. The search moved further, past familiar streets, into alleys and fields that seemed suddenly larger, more empty, more strange. The evening settled deeper, shadows stretching across the world like dark rivers, carrying the hush with them. Every rustle, every whisper, every tiny sound became amplified, a note in a symphony of growing unease. The parents paused again, scanning the darkening field, seeing shapes that might have been trees or something else entirely, shifting just out of reach. A faint breeze carried the scent of flowers, damp earth, and something faintly sweet, unplaceable, drawing them onward. The children called again, voices trembling, breaking, rising and falling in waves. Every shadow seemed alive, curling, reaching, folding over itself in impossible ways. The search became methodical, urgent, exhausting, yet no sign of Margaret appeared. A twig snapped. Everyone froze, listening. Nothing moved. The wind whispered through the leaves again, soft, deliberate, patient. A distant gate creaked, slowly, a hollow, deliberate sound in the empty evening. The parents exchanged glances, fear unspoken, rising, pressing against their chests. The children clung together, small hands gripping, hearts beating fast, echoing the hush of the growing night. The cricket's song rose and fell, steady, hypnotic, marking the passage of time, unyielding, persistent. Every step forward seemed to take them further from certainty, further from understanding, further from the safety they had known. Shadows twisted in corners of vision, curling around fence posts, tree trunks, flower beds, the air thick with unseen presence. The neighbors whispered theories, soft and low. Maybe she wandered off. Maybe she just got lost. No child disappears like this without someone knowing. But their words felt empty, weak against the hush that had settled over the neighborhood. The parents moved toward the tree line, searching, scanning, calling. The ground felt softer, strange beneath their feet, as if it wanted to swallow them too. Everywhere they looked, there were traces of movement, but no child. And in the hush, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath, waiting. No one saw Margaret, but they felt her presence, faint, distant, somehow just beyond reach. Margaret appeared at the edge of the yard without a sound. One moment the adults were calling her name into the darkening trees, and the next she was simply standing there, small and still, her doll tucked under her arm. Her mother cried out and ran to her, dropping to her knees, pulling Margaret close, holding her as if she might vanish again. Margaret did not cry. She did not tremble. She did not ask what was wrong. She simply stood there, calm and quiet, eyes unfocused, as though she had just woken from a nap. Her father knelt beside them, hands shaking as he touched her shoulders, her arms, her face, searching for scratches, bruises, anything that explained the missing hours. There was nothing. Her skin was warm. Her clothes were clean. Her feet were dry. Someone laughed softly, nervously, relieved beyond words. Another adult whispered a prayer under their breath. The tension broke in small pieces like ice cracking on a pond. Margaret's mother asked where she had gone, voice trembling, barely able to form the words. Margaret looked up at her then, eyes clear, expression mild, almost curious. "I walked through a dark house that wasn't there," she said. No one spoke. The sentence hung in the air, strange and unfinished, as if waiting for something else to follow. Her mother smiled weakly, brushing Margaret's hair back, assuming confusion, exhaustion, imagination. "A dark house?" she asked gently. Margaret nodded. "It was right there," she said, pointing vaguely, not toward the yard, not toward the trees, but somewhere in between. "There wasn't a door," she added. The adults exchanged glances. "What do you mean there wasn't a door?" her father asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Margaret frowned, thinking. "I don't remember going in," she said. "I was just inside," she continued, as if that explained everything. They led her to the porch, wrapped her in a blanket, sat her between them while neighbors hovered nearby, listening. Margaret swung her legs slowly, the blanket pulled around her feet, her doll resting in her lap. She spoke softly. Not excited. Not afraid. Just calm. Inside the house, she said, it was dark but not empty. The walls were close together. The air smelled old, like dust and cold wood, and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. There was fog inside, thin and drifting, curling along the floor and climbing the walls. The floor did not creak when she walked. It felt soft, like walking on thick fabric or deep carpet. There were hallways that bent in strange ways, turning where they should not turn, stretching longer the further she walked. Doors lined the walls. Too many doors. Some were tall. Some were short. Some were crooked, leaning slightly as though tired. She said she opened one door and found another hallway behind it. She opened another and found a room with no floor. Just darkness. She did not fall. She simply closed the door and walked away. The adults shifted uneasily. Someone laughed again, forcing it this time, saying children had such imaginations. Margaret continued. The house was quiet but not silent. There were sounds, soft sounds, like breathing, like footsteps behind walls, like someone whispering in a language she did not know. She said the whispers never came close. They stayed just beyond hearing, always at the edge of understanding. Sometimes shadows moved across the walls. Not shadows of furniture, not shadows of windows. Shadows shaped like people. Tall, thin, slow. They passed doorways but never entered the rooms. When asked who they were, Margaret shook her head. "They didn't see me," she said. "They were busy," she added, as if that settled the matter. Her mother's hands tightened around the blanket. Her father swallowed hard. One neighbor crossed himself without realizing it. Margaret said some doors floated slightly above the floor. Others drifted gently, swaying as if underwater. When she touched them, they felt warm. Not hot. Just warm, like skin after being in the sun. She said there were windows too, but they did not look outside. They showed places she did not recognize. Fields without sky. Rooms inside other rooms. A yard that looked like hers but felt wrong. She did not see herself in those windows. She did not see anyone. Just places. Waiting. The adults asked how long she had been there. Margaret shrugged. "I walked for a little," she said. "Then I didn't," she added, uncertain. Time, she explained, felt soft. Like it folded in on itself. Like sleep. She did not remember getting tired. She did not remember being hungry. She did not remember wanting to leave. When asked how she came back, Margaret looked confused. "I didn't," she said. "I was just outside again," she added. The house, she said, did not have an outside. It was just rooms, and doors, and hallways. "And then it wasn't there," she said again. The phrase repeated softly among the adults. "The house wasn't there," someone murmured. Another whispered it, slower, uncertain. "The house wasn't there," Margaret repeated, calm and sure. A chill moved through the group. Someone suggested she had dreamed it. Someone else said children wandered and imagined things all the time. Someone said perhaps she had fallen asleep somewhere and wandered back confused. But no one could explain the fog, or the doors, or how she had vanished without sound. Margaret grew quiet then, hugging her doll, eyelids heavy. Her mother kissed her forehead, relieved beyond words, yet unable to shake the cold knot settling in her chest. The neighbors slowly drifted away, voices hushed, glancing back at the yard as they went. The night settled in gently, crickets resuming their song, the world appearing normal again. Too normal? Margaret yawned. Her parents carried her inside, laid her in bed, tucked the blanket around her shoulders. She fell asleep almost instantly, but her mother stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to her breathing. And as she watched, she wondered, had Margaret imagined it, or had she walked somewhere that should not exist? A house with no door, a place that was not there. The story did not stay in the backyard. It moved quietly, the way whispers do, slipping through open windows and screen doors, settling into kitchens and living rooms across Hickory. By the next morning, neighbors spoke about it in lowered voices. At the post office, at the grocery store, on front porches while pretending to discuss the weather. A child had vanished, and then returned, but not quite right. Children heard the story first. They whispered about it at school, leaning close, eyes wide, voices hushed. They called it the dark house. They said it had no door. They said it waited. Some children claimed they had seen it, just for a second, at the edge of their yard, between two trees, behind the swing set when the sun was low. They said if you looked straight at it, it disappeared. If you looked away, it crept closer. Parents laughed when they heard this. They said children copied one another. They said imagination spread faster than truth. Still, some parents began walking their children home from school. Some kept them inside as dusk approached. Some locked doors earlier than usual. Dogs began acting strangely. Pets that once ran freely now stopped at the edge of Margaret's yard, tails tucked, ears flat. Cats refused to cross certain patches of grass. A neighbor's dog whined at night, staring at empty space near the fence, refusing to be called inside. Doors opened on their own. Just a crack. Just enough to notice. Windows rattled even when there was no wind. Floorboards creaked in houses where no one was walking. People blamed age, drafts, old foundations. Still, sleep came harder. Adults lay awake listening to the sounds of their homes. The tick of cooling pipes. The soft sigh of settling wood. The whisper of curtains stirring without reason. Margaret's parents tried to return to routine. They sent her to school. They smiled when neighbors asked how she was. "She's fine," they said. "She just wandered," they said. "She imagined it," they said. But their voices were thinner now. Margaret changed in small ways. She stared at corners of rooms for too long. She paused in doorways, tilting her head, listening. Sometimes she traced shapes on the wall where no shadow fell. When asked what she was doing, she shrugged. "Looking," she said. Her mother began finding doors ajar. The pantry, the bedroom, the back door late at night. She was certain she had closed them. She checked again, and again. A faint outline appeared once on the wall near the hallway. A rectangle, too straight to be shadow, too pale to be light. It faded when she touched it. Her father dismissed it. "Paint aging unevenly," he said. "Light playing tricks," he said. Still, he began checking the locks twice. then 3 times. Neighbors reported small things. A child laughing behind the garage when no children were present. Footsteps on porches after midnight. A window that showed a room that did not belong to the house. Most laughed these off. Some did not. At church, prayers lingered longer than usual. People avoided talking directly about the dark house. They spoke around it, in fragments, in half sentences. Margaret's mother stopped inviting guests over. She feared questions. She feared pity. She feared being laughed at. Late at night, she dreamed of hallways that folded inward, of doors that led nowhere. She woke with the sensation of having walked far without moving. Margaret's father dreamed less. But when he did, he dreamed of standing outside his own house, looking in through windows that did not belong. Some evenings, Margaret stood in the yard again, just standing, quiet, watching. Her parents called her inside quickly. They did not say why. The town felt slightly tilted, as if everything leaned just a little toward something unseen. The air felt thicker at dusk. Sounds traveled oddly. Laughter echoed longer than it should. Footsteps sounded closer than they were. People began noticing a shape at the edge of things. A window where no wall existed. A doorway outlined briefly in shadow. Always gone when stared at directly. The phrase spread without intention. The house wasn't there. It appeared in conversations, in jokes that fell flat, in warnings whispered to children before bed. Margaret heard it sometimes. She never corrected anyone. She never explained further. She simply listened, and sometimes smiled faintly as if remembering something distant and familiar. Her parents argued quietly at night, about moving, about doctors, about whether to talk to someone outside town. Fear of ridicule kept them silent. Fear of being wrong kept them awake. And beneath it all, a deeper fear lingered, that the house had noticed, that it had opened once, and might do so again. The town returned to routine, but the routine felt thinner now, like a story told one too many times. And beneath the creaking floors, the whispering drafts, the doors that would not stay closed, something waited. Patient, quiet, just out of sight. Days pass first, then weeks, then months, and the seasons quietly learn the child's name as she grows. She grows taller without noticing, shoes replaced, sleeves lengthening, the memory of the house staying exactly the same size inside her. It never shrinks. Time moves forward everywhere except in that place behind her eyes, where the dark house remains waiting. At night she dreams of ordinary things, school hallways, running water, distant laughter, until the shape of the house appears without warning. It is never announced. It simply stands there, black against black, as if the dream itself has stepped aside to let it pass. Sometimes she sees it reflected in windows during the day, a wrong angle of shadow that vanishes when she turns her head. She tells herself it is nothing. Everyone tells her it is nothing. Adults say memory is a strange thing, that fear can invent rooms that were never built. But the smell of old wood and cold air still arrives in her lungs exactly the same way it did that night. She can still feel the floor beneath her feet, uneven, patient, listening. Years begin to gather like dust on furniture, thin at first, then heavier, until the story becomes something spoken less often. The town forgets loudly. New houses go up, streets are repaved, the field where the house should have been grows tall with weeds and insects. Children play there again. They are warned not to wander too far, not because of the house, but because warnings always need something vague to cling to. Sometimes the child, now older, wakes just before morning with the certainty that a door has closed somewhere. No sound follows it. She lies still, listening to the quiet press against the walls of her room, and feels watched by something that does not breathe. Others begin to dream of it too, though they never speak of it directly. A neighbor mentions a strange building seen at dusk, gone by morning. A friend describes a nightmare with rooms that did not connect, with stairs that ended too soon. No one compares notes. The house survives this way, unconfirmed and therefore untouched. Local legends take their time forming, like moss growing on stone. Children whisper about a house that appears only when you are alone. They say it waits until you forget where you came from. They dare each other to walk the long way home after sunset, laughing too loudly, pretending not to look at the empty spaces between trees. Adults hear these stories and smile thinly, remembering something they refuse to shape into words. Someone claims a child once vanished near the field, though records say otherwise. Someone else says a man went missing years later, leaving behind shoes by the roadside. The stories disagree, overlap, tangle, and that makes them stronger. The child grows into an adult who avoids mirrors in the dark. She avoids certain roads. She avoids the question of why some dreams feel older than she is. Decades pass. The town changes hands, faces, languages, but the pauses in conversation remain the same length. At night, drivers report headlights catching on a structure that should not exist, just for a second, just enough to slow the heart. By the time they stop the car, there is nothing there but grass and the sound of insects. Some laugh it off. Some do not. A series of unexplained disappearances nearby makes the news briefly, filed under coincidence and human error. No bodies are found. No buildings are discovered. The field is searched again, measured, mapped, proven empty. That should end it. It does not. The dreams continue to migrate from person to person like a quiet illness. People begin waking with the phrase already in their mouths, unsure where they heard it. The house wasn't there. They say it like a question. They say it like an apology. Life in the town looks normal from the outside, lights on at dinner, dogs barking, radios humming softly through open windows. But something thin and unseen moves between these moments, brushing past memory without leaving fingerprints. The house does not need to exist to be present. It only needs to be remembered. On some nights, when the air is still and the distance feels close, footsteps seem to fade along roads that lead nowhere. A door creaks without opening. A whisper passes through the dark, slow and patient, repeating what was always true. The house wasn't there.